You're listening to the Final Say Radio Show, a Rappaport Media production, with your host Brett Rappaport and co-host John Rappaport.
We're going to have our good friend who's back, Leighton Steward, is joining us to discuss, again, not just energy, but I guess if you have to sum it up, it comes down to freedom. And it comes down to free markets, free ideas, freedom to discuss the ideas without being, verbally and I guess maybe physically attacked when you do so. And he's got a great article in the Daily Caller, the Obama administration's unscientific war on carbon. That's right, folks. Science is no longer in existence. It's just whatever you feel like your ideology is supposed to say is what the gospel is these days. But thank goodness we have gentlemen such as Leighton Steward to correct the record, if you will. Leighton, it's great to have you back on the program with John and Brett on the Final Say. Welcome back.
Well, John and Brett, I'm happy to be back. Thank you.
Well, it always fascinates me how, there's certain courses you take in college that are the ones that you're supposed to, introduce new ideas and have these kind of non-scientific discussions. But when it comes to areas such as energy and what you're discussing here, CO2 and its impact or whether it does have an impact on the earth and the environment, that's very scientific. So it amazes me how we get so off course, but this administration has certainly done a very good job of that.
Right. The president is obviously ignoring real empirical observations, and that is very anti-scientific. Because any hypothesis needs to be tested against real observations. Well, calling CO2 a dangerous pollutant that is going to cause catastrophic global warming is nothing but a hypothesis. It has to be tested against what we see happening in the real world, what is happening today and what has happened in the past. I'm a geologist by training, and, of course, we were trained to look back. We wanted to look back and see what had happened in Earth's history relative to how the continents were moving around and where the earthquakes were and the volcanoes were and everything so that we could understand it better today. That is totally applicable, that approach, to looking at climate change because Mother Nature has left us a lot of tracks that shows what old CO2 levels were and Earth's old temperatures were. And as you look at that data, you see that there's not a very good correlation at all between what CO2 was doing and what the climate was doing because there are too many times when CO2 levels were rising and temperature was dropping and vice versa. And right now we're going through a period that's 16 years long when Earth hasn't warmed at all, but yet the CO2 level is continuing to climb rapidly. And so all of these hints are in there. Mother Nature's provided them. For some reason, our president and the administration is ignoring real data on this. And so, as I think you may have implied earlier on, there may be some kind of an agenda here.
Yes, obviously. And what's interesting, I think, you go back to what we learned in grade school, and, we breathe out, the plants live off of what we breathe out. And, it's a whole cycle. Different. It's just kind of like we need animals and vegetation to survive, and vegetation needs certain things to survive, and animals need certain things to survive, and when you take one away, there's an impact. So when you have scientists telling you, hey, we have to stop breathing out.
I know. We breathe in 400 parts per million today, 400 parts per million. We breathe out 40,000 parts per million. That sounds like a lot. It's really only 4% of the atmosphere, but anyway, we do breathe out a lot of CO2. And, of course, the fossil fuels we're using, once we combust them, get converted into CO2. But the fossil fuels are nothing but a storage tank of the old sequestered CO2 that is being put into the limestone cliffs that we see and has been put into the ocean with all the little critters that have died and fallen to the bottom and everything. And so what we're doing today is we're reintroducing this old carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. The level of carbon dioxide on Earth today at 400 parts per million is still near the lowest level of CO2 on Earth, even though it's come up from 280 parts per million 150 years ago. It's still low. The plants and trees on Earth generally evolved in a much higher level of carbon dioxide. The first plants to come on Earth were about 430 million years ago. The level of carbon dioxide was over 4,000 parts per million. And by the way, 430 million years ago, when carbon dioxide levels were 4,400 parts per million, we had an ice age. There was ice that came down to 60 degrees latitude. So we had a major ice age at levels of CO2 that were, 11 times higher than what we're breathing today. That kind of gives you a clue that carbon dioxide is not really driving the temperature on Earth. This 16-year hiatus that we're having right now is another indication. If you look back even farther, another good one to look at is the Industrial Revolution happened about 150 or 60 years ago. And that's when we started having machines that were burning these fuels. First time we could measure CO2 going into the atmosphere and climbing. And it clearly was after the Industrial Revolution, slowly at first and then more rapidly right now. But they've been saying, well, man's addition of CO2 is causing this recent warming. Well, that was 300 years ago when CO2 first started climbing after the Little Ice Age. And so what caused the first 150 years of warming? The same thing that is causing the last 150 years. It's other natural causes. In the book I wrote, I think I identified about 18 climate drivers of different things, from continents moving around to volcanoes, earthquakes, ocean current changes, etc. And that's now up to 22 different things that drive the climate. So those things are what are causing this natural lull or plateau we're having right now, and clearly overriding the impact of all this additional CO2 we've put in the atmosphere. Now, what they are going on at the administration, they're going on what the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, has come out with, that all of their observations are really based on unvalidated, complex, man-made computer models. And they just don't stand up to real observations. Those models have now been utilized for at least the last 25 years, since 1988. And none of those models have predicted what has really happened to Earth's atmosphere since then. And certainly not in the last 16 years, because none of them projected this hiatus of the last 16 years. So what is really pathetic here is that the true environmentalists on Earth, and I think 80% of us claim to be environmentalists, the true environmentalists on Earth have been misled about this issue, and they're on the wrong side of it, and they don't even know it. It's understandable why they are, because climate science is so complex, and also nearly everything man has done in the past has been bad for a pristine climate. But this is clearly an exception, because as we all learned in the third grade, carbon dioxide is what plants eat. It's making them grow like crazy. The food crops are benefiting from it. The trees, the forest are benefiting from it. And the proof of that came out early this year when a scientist at NASA, sometime I think last year he came up with it, but it got publicized in January this year, that showed that one of these polar orbiting satellites that measures the entire globe about every 15 days could measure the greenness of the surface of the entire globe. And what it found out was that since 1979, when that satellite went up, for over 3 decades now, the Earth has been getting greener and greener and greener, despite us paving everything in sight with asphalt and concrete and putting buildings and houses on everything, and even clear-cutting a lot of the rainforest. Despite the negative things we're doing to Earth, the CO2 is a natural fertilizer for all the plant life, and it's causing what's left of our forest and grasslands and everything to overcome everything else we've done. So I might ask, why do we want to stop fertilizing these plants and things based on unvalidated computer model projections? It just makes no common sense.
Well, Leighton, there's a couple of key problems here. First off, and I think you pointed this out brilliantly, the data doesn't matter, the outcome seems to matter. In fact, I have a huge problem with research in general because I believe a significant amount of the research right now is outcome-based research because people don't want their funding to dry up, ergo they will give you the results you want no matter where they have to take their samples in order to make sure you get the results. And I think that's sad because I also agree with you. I want the truth. And in fact, I think in many cases we need to be celebrated as a people. I mean, look at what the Lake Erie looked like 100 years ago versus now. Look at how we've learned to replant our forests effectively and so forth. We've learned to, here in New Jersey, I was just doing some research this weekend, and black bear populations that were decimated, they're now healthy, and they're now in all 21 counties. So when you look at the environmental record, we should, if we listen to the government, we should all walk around, feeling guilt and shame. And the reality is, I think as a general rule, Republicans and Democrats alike care about the environment. But I think most civilized people would actually like to know the truth. And it's hard to get the truth. Now, I want to point something interesting that I think is also worthy of note because we have so much junk science here. If you look at real science going back at a time when the Earth had a much higher level of oxygen in the atmosphere, we had small problems like giant, seagull-sized bugs. I mean, look how afraid people are of spiders and cockroaches right now when they're an inch long. Yeah.
The wildfires were rampant, correct. With all that oxygen in the air. That's true. We're living in a paradise of a time, at least for humanity we are. There's just no question about it. These interglacial periods, which we're in right now, called the Holocene for the last 10,000 years, is so much better than an ice age. The ice ages last 85 to 90,000 years, and then we have these little brief interglacials for 10 or 15,000 years, and then we go into another ice age, and that's repeated itself now for at least 8 times the last 800,000 years. And so people just don't realize what we have right now. And everybody says, well, the people that do realize it say, well, let's don't change it. Let's keep it like it is. Let's control the climate. But the climate has never stayed steady, even in this interglacial period, because it's changed by 2 or 3 degrees centigrade over the last 10,000 years, up and down and up and down and up and down. There is nothing, I repeat, nothing happening today with Earth's temperature that hasn't happened multiple times in the past, whether you're talking about the amount of warming or whether you're talking about the rate of warming. There's no question we've put more CO2 in the atmosphere. But since the historical record doesn't show that it's had any significant impact because it doesn't correlate that well with old temperatures, why are we so afraid of something that is absolutely necessary for all life on Earth? So that's why the nonprofit that I'm the chairman of is called PlantsNeedCO2.org. And I would urge anybody that wants to look at some of the data behind what I've been saying is to go to that website. There is another spectacular website that's just come up now, actually as a result of me giving a presentation a couple of years ago to a bunch of ex-NASA scientists and astronauts. About 30 of them have gone together to study climate change because after they looked at some of the real data they were shown, they said, we were suspicious that what was coming out of the administration just didn't feel right. And so we've got physicists, astrophysicists, geophysicists, geochemists, geologists, meteorologists, engineers, etc., on this team. And they now have a website I would encourage your listeners to go to. It's called, interestingly, therightclimatestuff.com. therightclimatestuff.com. And they've been at this for about a year and a half now, and they're ready to take the whole world on because they are accustomed to looking at real data, and that's what we're talking about here. In fact, in the Space Center in Houston on the wall, it said, "In God we trust, all others bring data." So they're really focused on the right thing.
I think that's a very important part, the empirical data. But I want to go back to the comment I was making earlier about outcome-based science. When you have, just think of the social pressure that us as just normal citizens are under. If you're like some sociopath if you in any way question the environmental impact of carbon dioxide, carbon monoxide, or virtually anything, right? If you don't follow the common way of thinking, then somehow you're bad. Even if you question it to the point where I'm not saying it's not true, I just want to know why it's true or validate it or impact it. And it seems to me from what I have seen that scientists, in particular, have really been lambasted. If you don't go with the expected norm, you're completely marginalized. It sounds like from what you're telling me, maybe you're starting to get a little bounce back where we have scientists who've actually started stepping up and saying we're going to give you the truth whether you want to hear the truth or not.
That's correct. They are. They're stepping forward. And think of these guys that are stepping forward. These are the old Apollo scientists and a couple of astronauts thrown in. These are the people that took a human or several humans now and put them on another heavenly body. And 8,000, 18,000, 180,000, or 18 million years from now, these same guys will be remembered for being the first group to put somebody on another planet, our moon. So they have spectacular reputations, yet they're already getting rocks thrown at them saying, well, you're not really, all of you aren't climate science specialists. And, of course, the people throwing the rocks aren't either. But these guys, they're trying to tell these guys they don't have enough sense to read these peer-reviewed journals when they're PhDs in astrophysics and mechanical engineering, et cetera. And, of course, it's got them hopping mad now. And I'm happy to see it because they're ready to take the world on and say, in so many words, this is a big scam. And it's obviously being done for other reasons. I know, you know, there are at least 6 groups out there that benefit from, all of this government money, government funding that's available that you mentioned. You've got the present administration who likes tax dollars flowing through their hands, like all administrations have, because they can, one way or another, figure out how to buy votes. And then you've got the industries, the green industries themselves. You've got Wall Street when cap and trade kicks in. Academia has been the biggest disappointment to me, but it's natural when these big grants are going to academia to study the negative impact of carbon dioxide in this situation. You can't be an up-and-coming professor in one of these universities and really buck the dogma of that university when all this money's been flowing in and expect to get ahead. It's not going to happen. I've been on
the money will exactly the money will walk.
Yeah,
I'm sorry. That's
all right.
The money will walk immediately down the street. I wanted to point something out because I think it's a really sad irony. For years, we saw Al Gore position himself personally to make probably hundreds of millions of dollars on carbon. So he wasn't committed to the planet. He was committed to his own wallet. And how do we know that? Because the minute that failed and he suddenly had an opportunity to sell his country out politically to Al Jazeera, which has a very anti-American agenda, how quick did he take a few $100 million and run from that? And I think that's a perfect indicator of what you just mentioned on how, there's a financial reason why a lot of people are betting on this climate change horse.
Right. He's a sad situation. He's not a scientist to start with, and he obviously either doesn't have enough sense to just understand some of the basics, or, as you're saying, because it's such a personal benefit to him, he's just clearly ignoring it. The Russian poet Pushkin put it perfectly. He said, "Where there is a trough, there will be pigs." and that's where they're all lined up, including Mr. Gore.
Oh, yeah. No, that's absolutely right. When I look at this issue in particular, I always go to where the money and the power is either going or where they're trying to transfer it to. And I think in the case of, if you look at Europe, they've had a carbon tax. They've been pushing for all types of legislation to raise revenues based on this type of idea. You've seen the push in the United Nations for a very long time. And to me, that's the purpose of this. It has nothing to do with the real science, the real cause and effects, the real issues. It's just a mechanism for them to reach their ultimate goal, whatever that may be. I mean, we could speculate on that. But the bottom line is I think it's up to, and you mentioned it earlier with the peer review, and it's up to the scientific community and the educational resources and real studies to come out into the media, come out like you are, and speak of what the reality is and to highlight the inconsistencies or the false data, if you will. And so we appreciate the work that you've done here.
Well, thank you very much.
It's almost like a mission, because particularly when you have the president's administration that's been pushing so hard in the opposite direction, I think it takes an even greater effort on our part to confront it.
Yes, it does. It is a great effort, and there have been a lot of people doing it. There are a lot of true scientists out there that realize that this is nothing but a scam. When you really back off and look at this, and whether you're looking at the IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or just what's going on with all these different governments that are represented in these big conferences they have, there are, about 192 countries in the world, and I think 172 of them are classified as undeveloped countries. They are going to receive money from the 20 that are developed countries. So that's on this. So what can you expect to come out of the other end of that when you've got 172 countries that are going to get money? Ironically, we have been sending them CO2 now for several decades. We've been helping their plants, their food crops grow. And so we're now going to have to send them money because we sent them CO2, which the rest of the people that are on their side are causing a dangerous pollutant and global warming catastrophe. It makes no sense.
It's just here I have to take the chance, the opportunity to say it, because I say it probably almost on a daily basis. It's just another reason for us to leave the outdated United Nations and start something else if we have to.
You bet. We have no business there. Right.
These international agreements that we get ourselves into, first of all, I always have to question the Senate when they sign on to one of these arrangements, because I always feel like, whose interest are they working for?
Say, listen, I apologize, but I just heard my phone click, and I've got another interview in 3 minutes, and I'm afraid they're calling me now. But listen,
problem.
Thanks so much for having me on. I'll be happy to talk with you anytime.
Oh, it's great. We'll give your websites again. Anyway, thank you so much. All right, take care. That's Leighton.
Bye-bye.
That's Leighton Steward, and he's the chairman of the nonprofit corporation PlantsNeedCO2.com. Again, www.plants, that's PLANTSNEEDCO2.com. Great guy. He's been on the program several times, and like us, we use up so much of his time. We're going to make him late for his next segment.